Hello, and welcome to a TNC celebration of World Fish Migration Day, a global festival raising awareness of the importance of free-flowing rivers and migratory fish. I'm Allison Bowden, TNC in Massachusetts Director of Conservation Science and Strategy, and your host today. We have a fun and exciting program for you. We'll be taking you from Hawaii to Maine, showcasing some of TNC's top aquatic scientists and our conservation work that's helped improve fish migration across the US. We'll also explore some of what TNC and our partners are doing around the planet to celebrate and inspire action for free-flowing rivers and healthy oceans. The world's free-flowing rivers and healthy aquatic systems are disappearing, and migratory fish species are going extinct. In the US alone, more than 2 million dams and other barriers block fish from following age-old migration paths. But it doesn't have to be this way. Today, we'll showcase some of TNC's successes in helping remove dams, improve passage for migratory fish, and restoring healthy coastal waters. Our hope is that at the end of this program, you too will become advocates for fish migration, because together we can create real change to heal our planet. One housekeeping detail: if you have questions for our presenters, we'll be answering them throughout the program in both the chat and the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So please make sure to ask your questions as they come to you, and we'll answer as many as we can during the program. Thanks again so much for joining us today. Let's dive in. Our first presenter is Joshua Roy, Senior Conservation Scientist for TNC in Maine, which also shares him with our TNC Europe Freshwater Program and the World Fish Migration Foundation. Josh will briefly introduce the film When Rivers Return, which he produced with filmmaker Francisco Campo Lopez. But before that, Josh, what's happening with river restoration in Maine and with World Fish Migration Day?
Hey there, Allison. Thank you. And also thanks to the hundreds of participants joining today. This is a great turnout. And also a special call out to my dad, Paul Royd, who's in the audience out there somewhere. So let me start that. First off, 20 years ago, there really were few leaders in TNC as we started to delve deeply, as we say, into river restoration. But I think of you, Allison and Mary Beth, as real heroes for launching us in the Northeast to these really tricky, really pricey, difficult projects that sometimes go on, but they're incredibly important. And you'll meet others doing this work later in the same webinar, which is pretty exciting. So thanks for setting this up. Rivers and streams, as Allison said, are some of the planet's most beleaguered ecosystems with the most biodiversity loss when you look at terrestrial and avian life. Luckily, removing barriers in rivers is one of the things that we can do. It's a super effective way to stop and reverse this decline. So for TNC in Maine, to get to your question, Allison, we're getting barriers out of some beautiful rivers this summer. We have large plans for even more in the near future. So working with the Atlantic Salmon Federation, we're helping to remove a dam in Temple, Maine. It's on a tributary of the Sandy River near Farmington that has incredible salmon habitat. And then we're continuing work that we've been doing in the Penobscot River with mostly the Piscataquis drainage, one of the real important salmon and brook trout habitats in that enormous watershed. And they're new projects for us. They're these collaborative projects with Maine tribes in the Scudic, also known as the St. Croix River, and the Wollastook or the St. John River Basin. So both of these really broad scale watershed projects are being developed so that we'll be ready for infrastructure funding to get dozens and dozens of barriers out of rivers while helping local communities with these damaging dams and hazardous road crossings. So a neat use of our infrastructure money coming out all over the country. And globally, the Conservancy has hundreds of freshwater projects, and World Fish Migration Day is being celebrated with TNC projects in Europe, in Mongolia, Tanzania, Angola, Colombia, and around New England and the Pacific Northwest as well. So globally, we're at a much better place and time than ever before to reverse the global decline in biodiversity in our freshwater. And we'll talk a little bit about saltwater too, because freshwater and saltwater commingle. So the thing is, we all need to act much faster. We need to share more lessons expertise, and inspiration. So this webinar in particular, and the film that I'm going to share shortly, is about that inspiration. So this is part of World Fish Migration Day, a global celebration of the people that do this river restoration work, the rivers themselves, and our connections that make them better places. Herman Vonnegut is the director of World Fish Migration Day. He and I and some folks from World Wildlife Fund started this work in 2014, and it's been going every other year since then. And this film, which I'll introduce shortly, is a product of funding that we've received from NOAA Restoration Center for river restoration work. So this film is called When Rivers Return. We produced it with Francisco Kempa Lopez, who wanted to capture the real beauty of our restoration work. So the film focuses on 3 broad categories of benefits we see when rivers are restored. You'll see images and descriptions of cultural, economic, and ecological values. So those are just 3 major categories of many reasons why we should restore rivers. But the filmmaker didn't really want to show a bunch of talking heads and scientists and PowerPoint presentations. You wanted to show vividly, almost lusciously, you might say, the connections that people have to rivers and river restoration. So, so here's the film, and I hope you enjoy it.
Growing up on the Penobscot River, my dad would take me and other youth out to do different activities, and it was very much so ingrained in us from a very young age how important the river is.
When I grew up as a kid, my uncle and my dad would take me out in the river fishing or would go out canoeing. And I think now, through the years after I've had kids, now exposing them to the river, to seeing how it is now is a lot better than what I saw when I was younger. Now the fish are coming back, the alewives, the salmon, we're getting a lot more of the sea run fish that are coming up, so that my kids can experience that, like kind of how it used to be, like before they had the dams.
This river has been here for thousands of years, and so has my people, the Penobscot Nation. And we have been utilizing it for our purposes, hunting, fishing, going from village to village. This is our highway. This has been our highway. It still is our highway. It is the Penobscot River, and we are the Penobscot Nation.
My name's John Banks. I'm the Natural Resources Director for the Penobscot Indian Nation. I think our tribe is once again reuniting more with the river, because there is fish in the river now. We're part of this river. It flows in our veins. It defines who we are as Penobscot people, as a riverine culture tribe.
My name is Rick Lawrence, and I'm the alewife warden for the town of Benton. There have been no fish here since about 1840, 1850, when the dams on the Kennebec River down below, the Edwards Dam in particular in Augusta, which was removed in 1999. And so in 2009, when we first were permitted to harvest fish, it seemed rather minor. We were anticipating maybe $10,000 a year for the town and an agreement with harvesters. But since then, it has blossomed and bloomed.
In the end, restoration really isn't about the science, it's about the people. It's about connecting people back to this natural resource which belongs to us all collectively.
When we started alewife harvesting, it wasn't to sell lobster bait, it was to ensure that we had bait enough for ourselves, and it's turned into a substantial part of our income for the year. We've got fishermen from our town that will call through the day and don't want to drive the hour to come pick up a couple lobster crates worth of bait that they're going to need for tomorrow. So we'll take them home. We're going there anyway, so we bring them home to them, and they'll use them the next day for lobster bait.
Going out with my son, it means a lot. It's what I done when I was little with my dad. Hopefully keep it going for several more generations. Several more brooks and rivers in the state that they're working on rebuilding the fish population. And after several years of seeing how many fish are returning and sampling and what year classes they are, and then they're gonna, eventually you'll be able to harvest at other sites, and that will be very helpful, I think, for all the fishermen in Maine.
My name's Molly Payne-Wynn, and I'm the Freshwater Program Director with the Nature Conservancy in Maine. We're only a couple miles from the city of Portland, which is the biggest city in Maine. And we're standing next to this beautiful small stream, which is a tributary of the Penobscot. This is a conserved area that folks can come and actually see the benefits of river restoration with their own eyes. The change that's being brought about by reconnecting our rivers and streams is really tangible, and people see that, and they see the value that restoring these ecosystems brings to not only them as individuals, but to their communities as well.
I picked this spot because we did a restoration here about 4 years ago where we removed a dam and restored the floodplain, and it's a beautiful place that's healing. So when we restored the Setauket River here in East Bridgewater, we brought back river herring, which had been gone for quite a while. We brought back a beautiful floodplain that both provides important habitat for birds that you can hear in the background, and it also soaks up floodwaters. So when we get a lot of rain and have big storms, which are increasing with climate change, all of this area can soak up water and prevent it from causing flooding downstream.
I think restoring a river, the best way to look at that is restoring their home, or restoring your home. Restoring a river is restoring a home. It's putting people back, or it's putting fish back and the wildlife back to where they belong. And restoring a river is a natural way. I mean, that's the way that we should do that. We have that relationship with the fish and with the animals, and it's a whole cycle. And we need to do that. We need to restore the rivers so that we can maintain that balance.
And know that this river is coming back to life and coming back to some aspect of what it was like for thousands of years.
We'll jump to New Hampshire to hear from Rachel Roulard, Director of Conservation Strategy for TNC in New Hampshire. Rachel's going to show us what used to be the Mill Pond Dam on the Oyster River and why removing this dam has been important.
Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Roulard, Director of Conservation Strategy for the Nature Conservancy in New Hampshire. Today I'm joining you with some great news from Durham, New Hampshire. You'll see behind me is the Mill Pond Dam on the Oyster River, a tidal river to the Great Bay Estuary, an estuary of national significance. There's been a dam at this location for about 400 years. This was one of the very first dams built by settlers in the seacoast region to meet basic needs, and later was used to power a sawmill and a grist mill. Today, the dam serves only a limited recreational purpose for those who enjoy some skating on the impoundment or swimming in the backwater. And it is a head-of-tide dam, meaning that it acts as a barrier to the ebb and flow of the tides, restricting not only the movement of fresh and salt water in and out of the Great Bay Estuary, but also as a barrier to salt marsh migration and fish passage since it was constructed in the 1600s. The dam had been determined to be structurally unsound, so the community needed to make a choice, repair it or remove it. After years of study and debate, the decision about the future of the dam was put on the town ballot this March of 2022 for the residents to decide. TNC has a long history of working in Durham, in the Great Bay Estuary and in the surrounding communities, and because of the importance of this vote, we knew we had to figure out how we could be helpful in this effort to remove the dam. TNC staff provided scientific analysis and expertise, and we joined with motivated local partners who were already organizing an on-the-ground campaign to educate voters on the importance of dam removal and persuade them to turn out at the polls. We provided messaging, financial support, and helped to coordinate the campaign on the ground with a marketing and outreach plan. We worked really hard behind the scenes to support and amplify the many community voices in Durham advocating for removal. Of course, not everyone in Durham was supporting removing the dam, and the issue was pretty contentious. So with our partners, we really focused on the positive messaging, tying together the concept of freeing the river with the benefits that provides for both people and nature. And so we worked to connect the environmental values of residents to the future of the river and the estuary it feeds. And here's the great news. The vote went in the river's favor with 74% of the voters supporting dam removal. This accomplishment is huge. It will open up 2 miles of tidal river for the first time since the 1600s and reconnect the Oyster River with the Great Bay Estuary and the Atlantic Ocean. It's also a great example of how connecting people with nature is so critically important. Our work with the community has enabled us to build authentic relationships with new partners, and most importantly, has raised awareness about the value of the dam removal and the co-benefits of river restoration and what that provides to people and nature. Fish can't vote, but people can. Happy World Fish Migration Day from your friends in New Hampshire.
All right, fantastic. Okay, Brendan Rundy, a marine scientist for TNC in Virginia. The grandmas are definitely, there we go.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And so I'm Brendan Rundy, a marine scientist with the Nature Conservancy in Virginia. And I wanted to talk today a little bit about a different type of fish migration. So a lot of times with fish migration and World Fish Migration Day, what we start to think about is anadromous fish like salmon and river herring that do utilize our rivers and go all the way up into the freshwater portion of our rivers out of saltwater systems. And that is, of course, an extremely important type of fish migration. But there's another type of fish migration that's not often discussed, and that is what I'm going to talk about here. And it's a type of life cycle migration, and it occurs once in the life of a number of different very important species. And so this diagram on the slide that I'm showing you here describes what I'm talking about. And so these are fish that live in the ocean as adults, and they spawn offshore in the ocean on the continental shelf. Their eggs and larvae get washed in by currents and tides to the estuaries. So here I'm talking about sounds and bays and rivers like the systems that I'm showing you in this map on the screen. These eggs and larvae grow into juveniles in nursery habitat like oyster reefs and seagrass beds. And these oyster reefs, seagrass beds, and other nursery habitats are, of course, systems that TNC has been working on restoring for several decades. And so when these juvenile fish reach about 1 year of age, they then migrate offshore and settle onto structured habitat as adults, where they then live and grow and eventually, in theory, spawn, much as their parents did in those same locations. And so examples of these animals include important recreationally and commercially valuable species like black sea bass. Quite a few species of flounder have this same life cycle. Drum species like spot and croaker, and then off the southeastern United States, this is the type of life cycle that occurs in many species of groupers. So these are fish that many people have heard on, many people rely on for food and recreation. And these animals exist on a number of types of offshore habitat, which is a sort of a new frontier for the Nature Conservancy as far as refining habitat that I'm going to talk about here in a moment. And those habitats consist of natural or wild types of habitat like rocky reefs and coral reefs, but also non-wild or man-made structures like accidentally introduced things such as shipwrecks that might have been there for several hundred years, or intentionally introduced structures. And these could be artificial reefs that are for recreational enhancement like scuba diving and fishing, but also industrial structures like wind turbines. And so this is, of course, something that is an up and coming situation in the Atlantic Ocean and around the world, offshore wind. And so offshore wind turbines are structured for these fish to settle. as adults or as subadults. And so this little video clip that I'm going to show, it's just a few seconds long and it's going to loop. These fish that you're seeing are black sea bass. Many of them are small black sea bass that are settled on the vertical portion of an offshore wind turbine off of Virginia. And in the second portion of the clip, you can just sort of see the shaft of the turbine rising towards the surface. And this is a very large structure and provides quite a bit of habitat opportunity for these animals to settle on and live and mature on as adults. And so right now, off of the state of Virginia, there are just two wind turbines, and there are only, that's out of 7 total in the United States Atlantic. There are 5 off of Rhode Island and 2 off of Virginia. And so these turbines, they are not just vertical habitat, they are also horizontal habitat. And this is really where TNC's conservation work is starting to kick into high gear. So anytime you anchor a structure into the seafloor, like a wind turbine, you have to worry about a phenomenon called scour, which is where there is erosion of the sediment around the base of the structure that you are anchoring. And this erosion can cause undermining and instability of this, of course, very important structure. And so to protect from that, the power companies have engineers that design scour protection that you can see on this slide right here, whereby more material is introduced around the base of these turbines to prevent this erosion from happening. This material might be concrete or rock, and this is really valuable habitat for those animals, those species of fish that I was talking about at the beginning of these few slides, those black sea bass, those flounder species. So what TNC is trying to do is optimize this scour protection habitat to maximize its conservation benefit, and in theory, provide the most and the best habitat possible for these animals to settle on as subadults and grow into a mature and reproductive population that can contribute to the stock that millions of stakeholders access every year in the Atlantic Ocean. And so I mentioned that there are just 2 turbines off of Virginia right now. They each have about an acre of scour protection area around the base. That doesn't seem like a lot, but the slide I'm showing you here is the map of what's going to be off of the Virginia Beach area in just a couple of years. And this is just one area of the greater Atlantic that is going to have a major offshore wind farm. So we know that this is going to happen. This company is going to put an additional 176 turbines in place, which is great news for renewable energy. But we're trying to make it also great news for these fish stocks by creating the best habitat possible so that these animals can have the best possible place and create the best, most productive stocks possible. I mentioned 176 going in here to supplement the 2 that are already there. Over the next couple of decades, we expect that several thousand wind turbines will be in place in the United States Atlantic Ocean. So this is a tremendous amount of habitat and a tremendous opportunity for TNC to really focus on the conservation connectivity between the upshore habitats, or the upstream habitats in rivers with dam removal, the lower estuarine habitat projects with oyster reefs and seagrass beds, and now the offshore component of that same cycle with these habitat enhancement studies out there at the wind turbines. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and turn it back over to Allison. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, we're going to take another shot at jumping back north and seeing the video from Maine and Massachusetts. So now we'll hear from Jeff, Coastal Fisheries Manager for TNC in Pennsylvania and Delaware, who will talk to us about the Delaware River Basin Restoration Roadmap. All yours, Mary Beth.
Thanks, Allison. One second. Sorry about that. Looked all weird on my end. Hello, everybody. Thank you. As Allison said, I'm Mary Beth DeLucia. I'm with the Pennsylvania Delaware chapter of the Nature Conservancy. And today I'm going to talk briefly about a recently completed restoration roadmap for American shad, alewife, and blueback heron in the Delaware Basin. And first I'm going to start with a little background on the fish and the river. And I'm kind of having a little video envy now, but so I have no videos. So the Delaware River begins in the Catskill Mountains of New York and flows through Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware before emptying in the bay. It's an exceptional river that once supported some of the largest migratory fish runs on the Atlantic coast. The indigenous Lenape people would congregate along the Delaware River and its tributaries during the spawning run to catch the bounty of American shad and other migratory fish that would ascend the river. In 1600s, William Penn noted that an entire net of shad could be just taken with a single swipe. And by the late 1800s, Philadelphia was considered the caviar capital of the world due to its enormous Atlantic sturgeon fisheries. One of the reasons that Delaware is so exceptional is because its main stem has no dams on it, making it the longest undammed river east of the Mississippi. Well, our project focused on 3 species. Today I'm going to talk primarily about American shad. American shad are anadromous species, meaning they spend most of their lives in saltwater, but return to freshwater rivers in the spring to spawn. Their native range along the Atlantic coast extends from Labrador, Canada to Florida. They are the ultimate snowbirds, spending their summers in the Northeast and their winters in the South. For a time, American shad in the Delaware supported the largest commercial fishery along the Atlantic coast, with 4 million fish being taken in 1896 alone. Unfortunately, fishery collapsed in the early 1900s due to this overfishing. Today, the American shad population is estimated to be 1 to 3% of its historic level, and significant efforts are needed to restore this iconic species. As I will show you on the next slide, while these fish were being overfished, the dam building era was going into high gear. As I mentioned, there are no main stem dams on the Delaware River. However, there are over 1,400 dams on its tributaries throughout the basin. These dams, many of which no longer serve their intended purpose, fragment habitat and inhibit the access to this vital spawning and rearing habitat for shad and other fish. For example, the Fairmount Dam in Philadelphia was built across the Schuylkill River in 1821 and remains to this day. It effectively put an end to the Schuylkill River's historic shad runs. With limited restoration dollars, it is important that we focus our efforts on the dams that will provide the most increase in the quality habitat for spawning and rearing of our migratory fish. So how does one get from 1,400 dams to a subset of priorities that will allow for a focused restoration effort across 4 basins? We first started by investigating and updating the historic and current distribution of American shad. We did this by researching U.S. fishery reports that go all the way back to the 1800s. We interviewed lots of fisheries biologists, both current and retired, and researched other sources of information regarding shad and other species. This allowed us to narrow down the number of dams that were impacting shad, which you can see on the map on the left. And I do want to note that the rest of the dams are still impacting other fish, such as trout and eels, but these were just specific to the American shad. With help from the Academy of Natural Sciences at Drexel University, we also investigated the quality of habitat in these selected watersheds. And through this process, we narrowed down our list and ended up with 45 priority dams for American shad and river herring restoration, which are shown here on the map to the right, on the right. From there, we conducted site visits with dam owners, investigated feasibility, spoke with potential partners, and produced this roadmap. So this roadmap is an action-oriented document that provides critical information about the connectivity priorities for shad restoration within the Delaware Basin. There's in-depth information about each of the 45 priority dams, as well as key action steps needed to advance a restoration on these systems. Advancing this aquatic connectivity restoration roadmap in the Delaware River is essential to the recovery and resilience of these species. And identifying a key set of priorities in the roadmap can galvanize partners and align funding resources behind a shared set of goals, like we've seen happen in Maine on the Penobscot, and what we're trying to start here in the Delaware. Dam removal can benefit more than just the fish. Local communities and indigenous people have long-standing cultural and spiritual ties to individual free-flowing rivers. Their features and the species they support, restoration through dam removal can provide significant and sometimes irreplaceable benefits in restoring these connections to these communities. Local festivals celebrating the spring shad run were not uncommon in towns throughout the basin. Lambertville, New Jersey continues to host a Shad Festival, and recently Wilmington, Delaware relaunched its Shad Fest to celebrate the return of shad to the Brandywine Creek following a dam removal, the first of one of hopefully 11 dam removals on that system. The Delaware offers enormous potential for the recovery of its migratory fish populations. If you'd like to learn more about shad in the Delaware, the Nature Conservancy also developed a story map that focuses on restoring shad to the basin. The story map speaks to the history of shad in the Delaware from the time of the Lenape to the present. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mary Beth. Now we'll go to Beth Styler-Berry, Director of River Restoration for TNC in New Jersey. And Beth will talk to us about the Columbia Dam removal on the Pollins Kill. Over to you, Beth.
Okay. Good afternoon from New Jersey, everyone. I'm about to give an overview of the Columbia Dam removal, which took place on the Pollins Kill in northwestern New Jersey. And the Pollins Kill is a tributary to the Delaware River, one of the several shown on Mary Beth's map. And I'd like to give a little context. The Delaware River is 330 miles long, making it slightly longer than the Hudson River and slightly smaller than the Potomac. It drains an area of 13,000 square miles in Delaware, New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania.
Beth, can you jump your slides out to full screen?
I think Mary Beth needs to stop sharing. There we go. Okay.
Thanks.
So while the main stem, as Mary Beth mentioned, is the largest undammed river east of the Mississippi, its tributaries, including the Pollins Kill, are blocked by hundreds of dams. And today, as we celebrate fish migration, and this dam removal, the Columbia Dam removal, is certainly something to celebrate in terms of results for migratory fish. But I think it's also always important to remember that non-migratory species or resident fish and other aquatic life benefit from dam removals as well. In just a minute, I'm going to ask to queue up my video on my time-lapse video for the dam removal, which took place from June of 2018 through April of 2019. And we expected the construction period to be much shorter, but we experienced record-breaking rainfall in the over 90 years that records were kept. We kind of blew all of the records out of the water, so to speak, and you'll see throughout the video the dam pool rise and settle back several times as a result of that rain. I will be commenting as the video runs, but please watch for a few key dates running along the bottom, including April 7th, which is at about 2 minutes and 15 seconds, and April 21st at about 2 minutes and 23 seconds. I'll bring your attention to that again as well. But if you wouldn't mind, if you go ahead and start the video. The Columbia Dam was 300 feet long and 18 feet high and had an impounded area, a lake or an impoundment of 1.5 miles long. The Columbia Dam was generating power in 2016 when it was removed until the owner surrendered the FERC license. And that structure you see to your left is a walkway from the powerhouse out to the main dam. The first 8 feet or so of the dam was lowered by sending water through the turbines. Then we cut a 40-foot wide notch, drained a little bit more of the impoundment, and then widened that notch to about 80 feet. And again, this took several weeks. And then through the fall and winter, we had to do this in concert with some protection of upstream infrastructure, some big bridges up there. We had to make sure we didn't remove the dam too fast. The lake, as you can see, as the water is drained and the infrastructure there is removed, we needed to rebuild some stream bank, some floodplain area, and also make sure to adjust the stream bed to make sure that there was no obstruction to fish passage. So you can see all that happening through, this is late spring now. I don't know about you, but I can't see the timeline very clearly myself. But again, you'll see the stream bank be reconstructed, some more floodplain. We actually gained about 25 acres of floodplain as a result of the project. You can also see what looks kind of like a straight line in the middle, running toward you in the river, and that's what's left of the apron of the dam, which was the last piece to come out. So here comes some stream bank. And again, some adjustments for grade inside the stream, making sure there's nothing fish can't pass. And it's actually right about now that the big equipment leaves. And this is the first date I asked you to watch for April 7th. And right about now, April 21st, is the first shad migration. So just 17 days after equipment left the stream, we actually had shad documented 10 miles upstream of the former dam. I'll wrap up in a minute. I don't know, Elizabeth, yeah, you want to stop the video. So there's other exciting findings around this dam removal. In addition to reestablishing the migration of American shad, we've seen that the removal in 2018 immediately had an impact on temperature, lowering the temperature both up and downstream of the dam and reintroducing the natural temperature regime to this area. In 2019, another migratory fish, actually a pair of sea lamprey, were observed making a nest and breeding approximately 8 miles upstream of the former dam. Again, something that hadn't happened in over 100 years. And surveys of American eel, which live the majority of their life in the river, but migrate back to saltwater to spawn, have shown that smaller eels are now making their way further upstream. So in addition to just reintroducing fish, we're increasing the abundance and the diversity and also the age range throughout the river, and increasing in-stream aquatic life helps terrestrial animals that use the stream as a food source as well, and of course, increasing recreational opportunities for the community. So with that, I will say happy fish migration to everyone and many happy returns of this day, we all hope. And I will turn it over to Allison.
Wonderful. Thank you, Beth. Now we'll hear from TNC in Connecticut trustee, artist, naturalist, and author James Prosek, who will talk about eel migration. Over to you, James.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I guess I'm here because I spent 12 years writing a book about freshwater eels. A lot of my work happens to be about connectivity in nature, so how everything, is interconnected, which is kind of a cliche, but it's true. So eels are a fish that exchange biomass between the land and the sea. They're unlike salmon and shad, which are anadromous fish that spawn in freshwater and live their adult lives in saltwater. Eels do the opposite. They're catadromous. They spawn in the ocean and live their adult lives in freshwater. So I'm going to give a rapid tour of the research I did for this book. Eels are not only native to North America, but other species of migratory eels are native around the world. They're very similar in different places. So I first became interested in eels when I was caught fishing illegally as a kid by a game warden named Joe Haynes. And he used to eat eels. This is kind of a joke because you don't eat eels raw because the blood has a neurotoxin that is bad for you, would make you sick. But this was a picture actually taken for Yankee magazine years ago. But Joe grew up with German and Italian roots, and his parents ate eels. So we used to go spearing and trapping eels to eat. And through him, I learned about this fish that, lived in the pond across the street from my house that was born thousands of miles away in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in the Sargasso Sea. And that idea kind of blew my mind, and I wanted to investigate further. I started collecting hand-forged iron spears that people used to use in the 19th and 20th century, mostly to spear eels. So that was another entry point. This is a collection of spears is part of the cultural history of migratory fish, but I find these spears very beautiful, draconian as they might be. This is a painting from, I believe, the early 19th century by William Sidney Mount, called Eel Fishing in Setauket, sometime in the 19th century. I forget the date, but in the bow you can see a woman holding an eel spear, fishing for eels in Long Island, spearing. Typically you'd spear at night with a light, but you probably potentially could spear them during the day. So eels spend their adult lives in freshwater rivers, as I mentioned. Then they go out after spending 15 to 30 years on average, but in New Zealand, over 100 years sometimes, female eels will spend in freshwater. Before they spawn, they'll go out to the ocean and they lay their eggs and are fertilized out in the middle of the ocean. We pretty much don't really know what happens out there because we've never witnessed eels spawning in the wild. This was the Danish oceanographer who discovered the spawning place of the Atlantic eel in the early 20th century. I won't go into detail about how, but basically he found these little tiny larvae that don't look anything like an eel living out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and sort of put two and two together. Somebody discovered that these little larvae actually metamorphose into a more eel-like creature over time as they head toward the coast. These are some pictures from the Sargasso Sea. I actually wrote an article about this region of the Atlantic for National Geographic, and there's this weed growing out there that nurtures a lot of life, sargassum weed, that originates in the Gulf of Mexico. So it's another interesting connectivity thing. Partly because of this weed, there's nutrients out there that support the baby eels when they're born. Although we don't know how deep they're born. There's a white shark in here just to show that, there's other predators that are out there. Potentially, you see it, this one tagged white shark heading out to Bermuda, which is around where the eels spawn. So potentially this biomass that's supported by the land, when it goes out to the sea, it's actually supporting life out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. We halfway. Oh, that's how much time is left? Okay. There's a painting I did of, I incidentally make my living as an artist and a writer. So here's a painting I did of a big shark. So there's a big international trade for eels around the world. These are boats in the Basque region of Spain where they catch, this is an eel dealer, where they catch the live baby eels. They also do this in Maine. This is an eel dealer from Taiwan who's over there buying eels to ship. These baby eels, when they first enter freshwater, they call them glass eels because they're transparent. And they ship them live to farms in China where they're raised for the Japanese market. In the Basque region, they actually eat these baby eels and they're very expensive. They can be over $300 a plate. As they get a little older and spend more time in freshwater, they become pigmented. They call them elvers. At this point, they're very adept at climbing. They can climb a moist vertical wall like a small dam and make it over certain obstructions. But dams obviously are very bad for eel migration. This is a farm in Japan where they're raising those baby eels to harvestable size. This is an adult eel in Maine that on its fall migration to the sea got caught in turbines. This is a Francis turbine. What these turbines look like in these hydroelectric dams. The eels go down the penstock tube to where the turbine's spinning to generate electricity. And unfortunately, eels sometimes get caught up in the turbines and die. In certain areas, this is in New Zealand, the migration of eels is so abundant that they've actually stopped the turbines from spinning. On the left is the historical range of the freshwater eel. They used to go up every freshwater stream as far as they could, even up the Mississippi from the Gulf of Mexico. You can see even in Texas, in East Texas, near Dallas, there's eels, which is crazy to think they have to swim around the Florida Peninsula. And now on the right, because of obstructions like dams, you can see what the range of the freshwater eel has been reduced to. I think I'm running low on time, but 23 seconds left. In New Zealand, they have very large.
Go ahead.
You want me to go longer?
You're fine. You have a
Okay.
little time, yes.
Well, tell me when to stop, because I could talk about eels for 3 hours without problem. So in New Zealand, the eels get very big. They're basically the same eel as ours. They don't know where they spawn, but they can get up to 6 feet long and weigh 60, 80 pounds. And when the British introduced trout to New Zealand, they noticed there were these big dark predators in the water. And a big eel can eat a 4-pound trout like it's popcorn. So the British people were upset about that, and they began to put notices on fishing licenses that encouraged fishermen to kill eels, which was really bad for the native ecosystems. And I think the British also knew as colonials that the eels were one of the most important creatures in the culture of the Maori people, the indigenous Polynesians. So this was akin to killing the bison for the Plains Indians. It was a way to sort of reduce the native people's culture, and in general, not a good thing on many levels. Luckily, there still are longfin eels in New Zealand, but they're becoming endangered because largely of hydroelectric dams. They've tried to create devices to track eels to the spawning ground. This is a tag, a satellite tag that they attach to these gigantic eels and hope that they collect data, and then that white part detaches from the tag and floats to the surface and transmits data about where the eel has been traveling. But because it's a big device, you can't really expect the eels to swim normally, so they haven't gotten very good data from these things. Anyway, when the eels enter saltwater from freshwater, they undergo sort of a physical transformation. Their sort of noses become more snout-like and sharp. Their eyes kind of enlarge, and their pectoral fins grow bigger because they're essentially going from becoming a freshwater fish to an ocean-going vessel. This is a Maori man with a tank full of little baby eels. Should I stop or should I go another 10 seconds?
10 seconds.
This is the largest earthen dam in the North Island. So they have instituted these trap and transfer programs where they trap the baby eels and then move them over the dam. And then in the fall, they trap the adult eels and try to bring them down to the sea. And this is all mostly volunteer work because these animals are very important, again, to their culture. This was a woman named Stella August who helped me with some of my research down there, and another Maori guy who, so these are just different traditional fisheries, and where they're catching and drying these big eels, just like salmon. And I'll end with the Delaware River because someone else mentioned it. A big part of the book is spending time with this fisherman in Hancock, New York, who has an old river weir for catching eels in the fall when they're on the migration. Ray Turner, you can look him up online and go buy his smoked eels if you're interested. But the Delaware is a remarkable river. I think someone said the largest undammed river on the East Coast of North America. So that's a pretty special thing. And if we can take more dams down, then we can have more of these, amazing creatures coming through. This is an image of the weir, the fishing weir from the air. So I'll close there, and thank you for having me. I think it's incredibly important dam removal is one of the greatest environmental stories I think happening today, and it's very heartwarming for somebody who likes fish like me. So thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, James. And you brought in the global perspective as well. So many of these species really do have a global presence, and they're so important to people and ecosystems all over the world. So thank you, James. And with that, we'll head over to Hawaii to hear about a freshwater fish that travel from streams to the open ocean with Sam Ohu Gon, Senior Scientist and Cultural Advisor for TNC in Hawaii.
Mahalo, Allison, and aloha, everyone. As Allison mentioned, I'm Sam Ohu Gon. I'm the Senior Scientist and Cultural Advisor for the Nature Conservancy of Hawaii and Palmyra. It's my pleasure on World Fish Migration Day to celebrate our work in Hawaii with native migratory fishes here. And I'm going to start my, there we go. So Hawaii, which is the land of my ancestors, includes some of the most dramatic topography in the world and some of the steepest stream gradients to be found anywhere. Hawaiian freshwater gobia-form fish called o'opu are amphibious and include some remarkable climbers that can scale waterfalls falling from cliffs over 1,000 feet high. There are 5 species in 2 gobia-form families, 4 gobiids and 4 different genera and 1 eleotrid. 4 out of the 5 are endemic to Hawaii and are well known in Hawaiian culture, each bearing a Hawaiian name, such as O'opu Alamo'o, Nopili, Nakea, Akupa, Naniha. And those names are known not only by native Hawaiians, but by all fish biologists in Hawaii. They know and use them. Their climbing abilities are quite remarkable and enabled by modifications of fins and mouth parts that allow them to inchworm their way up alongside vertical waterfalls of great height. All of our o'opu mature in freshwater streams, but send eggs and larvae down to the sea for a planktonic phase. They return to streams via estuaries as juveniles called hinana and migrate back up to their optimal stream reach to mate and restart the cycle. During that sensitive phase, when the tiny, transparent, newly metamorphosed hinana are attempting to re-enter the stream environment from the sea, modifications such as this major channelization project on Maui Island truncate the cycle and effectively extirpate all diagamous species from the system. That's why the Nature Conservancy inventoried the highest quality freshwater continuous perennial streams of the archipelago and was extremely fortunate to have one of the paramount stream ecosystems donated to the Hawaii program in the late 1980s, remote, undeveloped Pelekunu Valley on the rugged north coast of the island of Molokai. Pelekunu is acknowledged as one of the best Hawaiian continuous perennial stream ecosystems of the entire island chain. It's home to large, healthy populations of all 5 native diagamous gobia forms, including O'opu alamo'o, the rarest species with the most exacting habitat requirements. Every 2 years, TNC crew take inventory of the distribution and abundance of these migratory freshwater endemics from the mouth of Pelekunu Stream up to its upper tributaries. In addition, we manage the terrestrial portion of the valley to control feral introduced animals and key invasive weeds that can modify the riparian habitat and degrade stream conditions. Today, Pelekunu stands as one of the most best protected native stream systems in the islands. But Pelekunu is not the only site where we are protecting habitat for o'opu, even on our most populated island of Oahu, on the windward side of the island. The Conservancy is a partner in an effort to improve the health of the estuary at He'eia and restore habitat for aquatic species, not by the prevention of development, but by removal of a major habitat modifying weed. And ironically, although mangroves are valued in other places in the world as vital estuarine keystone species, in Hawaii they are all introduced and induce anaerobic blackwater systems completely noxious to native stream life. So with our community partners and the National Estuarine Reserve researchers at He'eia, mangrove removal is underway, and the results are frankly amazing. After nearly a century of mangroves choking the estuary at He'eia, when they were removed, the waters cleared, riparian and wetland reintroductions took off, endangered water birds returned, and o'opu re-entered the He'eia stream system, demonstrating how resilient our diagamous fishes can be, and offering another growing success story on World Fish Migration Day. And with that, mahalo for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. The names of the species are so beautiful. I'm so glad that you shared those with us.
Yeah, mahalo, they're delicious too. The larger ones.
That's great. Well, we're approaching the end of our time today, and I want to give Josh, who opened our program, the opportunity to offer any quick final thoughts to take us out.
Thank you, Allison. This has been a great webinar, and it's so fun seeing all the things happening from way out to sea in the Pacific and the Atlantic and how it all connects to our rivers and streams. And it's a thing that I really appreciate about World Fish Migration Day is it just is a chance to stop and appreciate. It's an opportunity for gratitude and for learning about these connections, which are so wonderful, intense, and magical. So the more we can inspire each other and be advocates for our rivers and streams and making sure they're connected, I think the better places we'll live in and the better planet we'll have. So thanks for hosting this event. And I look forward to other people joining other events around the world as they roll out all the way up until May 21st. So thanks for hosting.
Awesome. Thank you, Josh. And thank you once again to all of our panelists for joining today and to everyone who tuned in for your support of the Nature Conservancy. Your support is what makes all of our work possible. We want to encourage you to take action to support free-flowing rivers, healthy oceans, and fish migration. You can get out to visit a fish migration site near you and see this wonder of nature for yourself. Share what you learned today with others. Advocate and vote for free-flowing rivers on local, state, and national levels. And of course, donate to TNC and other organizations that are doing this important work. We'll be sending everyone a follow-up email over the coming days with links to the resources we talked about today and a recording of this webinar. Thank you again for joining us and have a wonderful rest of your day.